think everyone's here. Well, even if they're not, we can start the work session. So go ahead, Kelly.
Thanks. So this is a continuation of the work sessions that we've been doing for Planning Commission training. We are very fortunate to have Brian Vendetta here to talk to us about storm drainage, and he has been so kind to put together a presentation and talk to you guys today. So please be nice to him. And I will start sharing my screen that will have Brian's presentation on it. And take it away, Brian.
Super. Thanks, Kelly. So good evening. As Kelly stated, my name is Brian Vendetta. I'm a civil engineer and land surveyor at Udell Engineering here in town. And I'll tell you, my first response when she asked me if I'd come and be willing to give a presentation on Oregon drainage law was, I don't know if I want to do that, because then when I educate them about what the law says, then I can't BS them during the public hearings quite as easy. No, just little icebreaker there. So I'm going to present it to you really from an engineer's perspective. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving you or intending to give you any legal guidance with respect to the Oregon drainage law, but as an engineer, we deal with it. Every project that we get into, if there's a drainage aspect involved with the project, we have to make sure that we're conforming with the Oregon drainage law as we see it, to protect not only ourselves, but our clients' interests as well. So I'm gonna, next slide, please, Anna. Just a quick overview of the presentation. I'm gonna talk to you briefly about where Oregon drainage law originated. I'm gonna explain to you what I believe the meaning of the Oregon drainage law is from the perspective of a civil engineer. I'm going to talk to you about what the goal of Oregon drainage law is for civil engineers, what our goal is going into a project as we deal with Oregon drainage law. And I brought some examples of past projects, some that were built quite a few years ago, and some that are actually under construction, and one that we're still working on. And it's actually hung up because we haven't solved the drainage situation. And I'll get into that a little bit later on in the presentation as to why we haven't been able to quite solve that yet. So Oregon drainage law, its origination, it wasn't developed by anybody at the legislative level. It wasn't written, taken through the proper channels. It was derived out of case law and common law. So as people did things that weren't satisfactory to their neighbors and they took them to court to rectify it, the judges and the decisions that they've made have developed the principles of the Oregon drainage law. And we'll kind of walk through those principles as we go through the presentation. I find that pretty interesting because most laws are pretty well vetted out. They're discussed, they're negotiated, they're lobbied, and then they're voted on and decided. This actually is a law doctrine and hasn't gone that route, but yet we follow it as if it is law. And Mr. Kennedy could chime in too. It may not even be a true law, but we recognize it as a law in the drainage world.
Yeah, I think it's kind of you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but it's kind of an extension of just common law nuisance, right? If
exactly,
you know how you treat your neighbor.
Yep, and I think it's evolving. I mean, as we go through this, you're going to see most of what was arrived at in the decisions is really common sense. I mean, some of the stuff that you should know not to do to your neighbor's drainage, but people did it anyway, and the judge had to issue the decisions and write them into law. So, meaning of Oregon drainage law, and this is paraphrased by myself, and it's very simple, but basically landowners are entitled to have the natural course of drainage maintained. Meaning if I'm an uphill drainage landowner and I have a neighbor that's below me, one is viewed as the upper and one is viewed as the lower, and both of them have responsibilities and requirements that they have to adhere to protect the Oregon drainage law and in particular each other's rights. And I'll go into, next slide, please. The lower landowner. And really, these are very basic. The lower landowner, if you're below a property owner, you have to accept the stormwater that naturally and historically is drained onto your property. Unless the uphill property owner has done something to accelerate it or increase it, then you could take some mitigation measures, I believe, to rectify that. But if the drainage course is stayed in its natural state, you are not allowed to obstruct the surface waters and prevent that water from coming onto your property if that's its natural course. Pretty basic to me, but you'd be surprised how many phone calls we get on a yearly basis from property owners within single-family residential subdivisions that say, my neighbor put fill on his property and now I've got ponding in my backyard. What can I do about it? We deal with it all the time. And then there's the upper landowner, and the upper landowner comes with really more responsibility, in my opinion, especially if they're going to do something with their property or propose to do something with it. And this first statement that I included in the presentation, it really pertains to if you're going to develop the property beyond its natural state. If it's in its natural state, neither one of these would really apply, but out of Oregon drainage law, it says that in order for the upper property owner to drain onto the lower property owner, one of two things have to exist. And that first thing is there has to be a natural drainage course that exists from the upper property through the lower property. Pretty simple. If that doesn't exist, then you have to obtain a legal right from the lower property owner, and you have to do so in a fashion that's supported by a valuable consideration. And typically what that refers to is getting an easement. Give you a couple of examples. So if I'm working for a client and they are on the upper property and there is a natural drainage course that goes through both properties, and we go through the proper channels to obtain permits so that we can develop the property, we can continue to discharge the stormwaters that are developed onto that lower property so long as we don't accelerate their rates. And I'm going to get into that a little bit further. I found throughout the language I've researched that the word acceleration comes up in many, many places. Because if you can imagine, anytime you develop a piece of property and you put more impervious surface over the pervious surface, you're going to increase the amount of water. Just there's no way not to, because that water, when it hit the ground, a large portion of it used to absorb or infiltrate into the soils. You cover it with impervious surface, the volume of water that's going to leave is going to be increased. The only thing we can do as designers is we can control the rate which it leaves the property. So that's one example. The second example is if I'm the upper property and there's a lower property and it's both properties are sloped in a constant fashion in the lower direction, but there's no drainage channel, then I cannot develop the upper property, collect all the stormwater and dump it onto the neighbor. That's my interpretation. I can't because there's no place to dump it to. So the only thing I can do is I can obtain an easement likely to construct a drainage channel through the lower property or to construct a pipe to pass the water down to maybe an existing system that's below that lower property. So that's what that first statement's getting at is if there's an existing natural drainage course, the upper property historically is drained to it, we can continue to drain to it so long as we don't accelerate the rate of water leaving the property. And I'm leaving out one word, substantially accelerate, and that's in many, many documents. Or we have to purchase and obtain an easement from them to give us that legal right. And then in addition to those, well, let me stop right there, see if anybody's got any questions about what's been said so far. Am I doing all right pace-wise? Am I, okay. Cool. So in addition, in the law doctrine, three other basic elements must be followed. The first one says a landowner may not divert water into adjoining land that did not or would not have otherwise taken that water on. In basic explanation is you have to keep the water that you're discharging within the same drainage basin And you can't dump it onto a property that didn't currently or hadn't historically received that stormwater. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the first statement. If there's no natural drainage course and the water's not going that direction, you can't send it that direction. And we actually just finished, I just wrote a stormwater report for a property in Jefferson, Oregon. We're going through a wetland permit process. And some of the neighbors that showed up at the public hearing asked that the stormwater be taking out of basically the drainage that goes to their backyards because it flooded periodically and they were tired of dealing with it. And the city engineer, I thought, did a good job because there is another option to take the water in a different direction. We're kind of right on the ridge and we could go the other direction. But he explained to them that, no, we can't do that. We have to continue to take it down this route, even though you've got problems. What they develop, they just need to make sure that they don't exacerbate those problems that exist. And that's another misconception in Oregon, or in any development for that matter. Downstream properties feel like an upstream property. When they develop, they have to fix all their problems. They don't necessarily have to fix all the problems. They just have to keep them in their current state is my opinion as an engineer. As long as we don't increase the stormwater that's being delivered to them, we're doing our job properly. And then the next one kind of gets me, and every time I read this, I scratch my head and think, well, if this was truly the case, we wouldn't be able to develop anything. But it says water collected and discharged, which normally would infiltrate into the ground, pond, or evaporate. So we're not allowed to do that. But every time we do a development, we think about it, we do that same thing. So the conclusion I've drawn as an engineer is when they say that, I believe what they're really saying is you're not allowed to do that unless you provide a mitigation measure for it. So when we develop, for example, when we develop an urbanized setting and we take a non-developed piece of property that all the stormwater or a great portion of it used to infiltrate in the ground, we put the impervious surface on it, we collect the stormwater. Before we discharge it, we route it through typically a flow control measure. And that flow control measure continues to release the water at the same rate it did prior to, and it doesn't accelerate or exacerbate the rate of water that's being seen by the downstream neighbor. So that's my interpretation. I read that and I don't think it's hard and fast that you can't do it. I just think it's telling us we can't do that unless we provide a mitigation measure for it.
Hey, Brian,
Yes, thanks. What, Kelly?
can you provide an example of a flow control measure?
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, so the detention pond is an aspect of the flow control. The flow control typically is an orifice that's constructed on an outfall of a pipe in a manhole so we can get to it and we can maintain it. So I'll just give like a real life design example. So Mckinneyland Apartments, we're working on that right now. It's under construction. It's on Russell Drive opposite Franklin. That storm drain system, it all gets collected, it all gets routed into one facility, and then it goes out through, a manhole that on the outfall side of that manhole has a 3-inch orifice on it. That 3-inch orifice was calculated to only allow the same amount of water that was let off the site before we started any development. The detention pond is the receiving water for the waters that can't get through the orifice. So, like I said earlier, we're going to create more water when we develop a piece of property. There's no arguing about that. What we can do, though, is we can provide a volume storage facility. We can decrease the rate of water that's leaving the site. The amount that's hitting the hard surface and getting to our system is going to be accelerated. We need to make up the gap, make up that surge and mitigate the water by storing it until the storm dissipates. And then over time, it is released at that lower rate. Same increased volume of water, but it's just spread out over a longer period of time, so the rate gets decreased. Does that make sense? Or did that answer the question that I know that you were about to, okay. And there are other measures, and let me walk through one or two more of these, and I know these law portions are kind of boring, but I do have a whole section of examples, and we'll jump off onto some tangents because there's quite a few different things that are being built into the rules that haven't quite made it to Lebanon's rules yet because of the size of a community. So number 2, the point that the water is discharged onto the lower landowner may not be changed. So what that means, if I'm the upper landowner again, and I've got a stream that traverses my property and goes on to the neighbors below me, and I want to fill that stream because I think the place for my shop should be right where that stream is. I get all the right permits, I fill it, I reroute it around my shop. I can't take it onto the neighbor's property at a different spot. I violated Oregon drainage law because it's not the receiving spot that historically it's gone onto his property. Similar situation if there's no channel, both properties just sheet flow onto one another. I can't develop, collect all of that water and release it at one point if historically it's released over the entire width of the property line in sheet flow. Both of those examples would be a violation of the Oregon drainage law. The third one says that the upper landowner may not accumulate large quantities of water, then release it, greatly accelerating the flow onto the lower landowner. The key there is the last part of the statement, greatly accelerating the flow, because we always, when we develop property, we collect the stormwater. I mean, we've got to route it into a system so that it functions. The key is making sure that, again, that we've mitigated in our design and provided the proper flow control or discharged as much of it back into the ground as is feasible before we release it. All of the conveyance systems that we design, they're all flow-based. All of the pipes, when we get asked by NOAA Fisheries, or we get asked by Oregon DEQ or a local jurisdiction to evaluate the downstream capacities, we always evaluate how much flow that pipe can take or how much flow the channel can take. And we just need to make sure that we don't increase the flow rate leaving so that we exceed those capacities and cause downstream floodings. It sounds very simple, and I agree, it is very simple when you read through it. All of this stuff, you'd read it and you'd say, well, that's no-brainer stuff. Everybody should do it. But some of the applications get very complicated. Sometimes it's not as easy to maintain those rates as one would think. Okay, so the next item, just the main goal. So as an engineer, what is our goal in when we're designing a system to make sure that we're complying with Oregon drainage law? It's really basic. I mean, we want to make sure that we protect the landowners from any potential adverse effects that may be realized if the natural course of drainage is altered. And if we do that, we should never have to answer to anybody because we're avoiding the problems. And when we turn plans in, actually, back up, every condition that I read from a development from a city or a county, it always says that you shall design your stormwater system so as to not adversely impact the upstream or the downstream property. And the reason it mentions upstream is, we're required to take their water and pass it. We can't restrict it. So if in fact, I'm going to hold on that comment because that's my first example. But so that's really, in a nutshell, that's an engineer's dealings or perspective of Oregon drainage law. I'd say 101, but it might be 090. I mean, I should have said that before I started. This is the first presentation I've given with respect to technical data. So I don't do this every day. I don't run around and advertise to do it. Kelly asked me to, and I thought, now this would be a great opportunity to share the knowledge I've got or have obtained. So maybe I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions before I jump into the examples.
Sure, Brian. Are there any laws, rules, or regulations regarding the size of the property that you have to apply these rules to? For example, if somebody just has 1,000 square foot lot and they want to put a sign on it or something, would these drainage laws apply to that, no matter how small? Of course, a big subdivision is going to require drainage laws, but
That's a great question. And to answer it in a black and white form, I think I'd have to be of Trey Kennedy's caliber. But I'll tell you that if I have a client that comes to me and they've got a single lot, I will tell them that they have to make sure they don't block the neighbor's drainage. Because we just recently, on the south end of town, I'd say recently within the last year or two, I got a phone call from a property owner and he said, I need you to come out and look at this with me because my neighbor's filled his lot up 1.5 feet in the backyard. And now I've got ponding in my yard. So very common. In subdivisions, you have islands of lots and then you have streets on both sides and those backyards are common. So when we designed the subdivision initially, we pitched the backyard and we shed both directions to the street. But then they come in there and they put a house in between that back property line and the street. And if they don't do it properly, they want to raise the house up and shed that backyard back to the back property line. That doesn't work very well. That's exactly what happened is the first row of houses got built and they shed everything to the back. Well, the second row on the other side came in and they elevated things because they saw that there were some puddles in the backyard and they wanted to fix it on their side of the fence. So they raised it a little bit more so it would shed out to the street. Well, then it pushed all of the water onto the first guy that was there. So it happens more than you'd think. And it's a very tough thing to regulate. There are a few communities that insist on seeing grading and drainage plans for every single lot that's developed with a house. And there are some that only look at it at the subdivision level when you build the initial infrastructure of the streets. Frankly, I don't know what Lebanon, I think Lebanon has in their building permit section, you guys review the drainage.
Yeah, it
don't you?
depends on the size of the development that you're talking about. But if it's a site, if we require an engineered site plan, we would require that information. But for a single family residence at this point, no, we wouldn't.
So, don't know if this is proper or not, but I'm going to throw a name out here because I've always admired this person. So West Tech Engineering, Steve Ward, he does a lot of engineering work for small communities. That's kind of his bread and butter. He's a consultant. And he insists on every development that every lot that's developed, he reviews their drainage plan. And those small communities that he works in, they usually don't tend to see these issues that come up. I had a client call me in Lyons, or a potential client, a couple weeks ago, and it was in the burn area. So he and his neighbors were rebuilding. Well, the neighbor rebuilt and filled 3 feet, and he was the upstream property and blocked all of his drainage. And he called Marion County and they said, well, we don't review the drainage on site, so don't call us. And I thought that was rather odd because I thought that they would take a look at that or enforce some of those rules, but they don't. And I think it all circles back to the fact that this is, a law that was generated out of case law, and the communities really don't enforce it much. It's up to
How
the.
did they settle their issue? Did they litigate it? Or-
He hasn't called me back. I gave him some advice. I told him what I would do if I owned the property, and he hasn't called back. So I don't know if they've resolved it or not.
Thank you.
So shall we jump into a couple of examples? Kelly, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Okay. So this particular project is on Reeves Parkway, or it was on Reeves Parkway. It's still there, Cascade Ridge Apartments. So this project was extremely difficult and unique with respect to stormwater. So the map that I've included in the slide and in the PowerPoint, it is a delineation of a drainage basin that we identified all went north and eventually ended up in the Albany-Santiam Canal. So when my client first started the development, we took a look at it. We developed this drainage basin. We determined that historically, all of the stormwater surface flowed through shallow swales into the canal. The problem is Albany doesn't like stormwaters going into their canal. In fact, they refute most of the stormwater that's proposed to go into their canal. So we started looking at other options. What we found was that all of the other options that were available to us, we felt like violated Oregon drainage law, because the only thing we could do was send the water west down Reeves Parkway. We knew that historically there was a problem with what is now the Lowe's property, because there was some lawsuits years and years ago that I believe were revolving around stormwater. So we didn't want to add to that mix. We actually investigated and got an easement. Let me back up a minute. Albany originally told us we could do it. They wrote us a letter, one of their lower level engineers sent a letter saying, yes, it historically goes there, you can go there. So we obtained an easement from the cemetery owners, and we were going to take a storm pipe to the east, down Reeves Parkway, across the highway. I'm going to tell you a lot more than Oregon Drainage Law here, but this is a pretty good story. And out and discharge in the canal at that point, because the neighbor to the north wasn't willing to give us an easement to get all the way to the canal. So ODOT was doing a project. Our time frame was limited. We rushed a quick design together. They required us to do it during the nighttime. We put in a 30-inch storm drain under the highway. About a month later, ODOT, or not ODOT, the State of Albany recanted their letter. Somebody higher up said, no, you're not going to go to our canal. We're not going to allow you to do that. So there's still that pipe under the highway, by the way. It's about 10 feet deep. But so my client spent probably $50,000 for that measure. What we ended up doing is we backed up, we took another look, and we said, wait a minute. Now, if we build a proper detention system with this development, we can let the water out at its historic rates into the shallow swales that are to the north of us. That's where all the water goes today. We also had, I don't know, 30 acres plus or minus to the south of Reeves Parkway that come under Reeves Parkway and culverts that we had to collect and pass. So we did that. And if you flip to the next slide, Kelly, tough to read. I apologize for that, but the scale didn't look. This was what our final design ended up being. We constructed a perimeter detention facility around the development that ended up being about 4 feet deep. We discharged all of our storm drain into it. And then out the backside, we had small orifices that let low levels of stormwater out into those existing open channels. And eventually, the odd thing about this whole story is eventually they end up in the canal because that's where they go. But we didn't directly discharge to the canal. We followed the historic drainage courses and nobody said a word about it. We also spent the additional money of taking a storm pipe. Again, it's really tough to see and I apologize, but we built a storm pipe from Reeves Parkway through our project and discharged it through our detention, not into our detention, so that water would pass freely to conform to the drainage law portion that says we have to pass all upstream water that comes onto our property. So. Anyway.
Is that collection ditch that you made? I can't tell the dimensions on it. You said it's 4 feet deep. How wide?
I think it was 14 feet wide.
Wow. Is it just filled with river rock? Or?
It's a void, so it's a big moat. The bottom of it's drain rock. We excavated the bottom down to the gravels and sands because we wanted to get as much to go back in the ground as would physically go back in before it discharged on the neighbors. Today, the system, though, with the development that's occurred recently out there, we did put a provisional pipe in 5th Street when we built this, and knowing that someday there'd be development further to the north, and it's been connected to that. So there is a portion that still goes out through these swales, but a lot of it goes out into the 5th Street drainage, which is now hard pipe to the canal, which I didn't print out as an example, but that was a later client, and he had no option but to go to the canal. So after several back and forths with the city of Albany, they said, if you provide additional stormwater detention on your sites, we will be kind enough to allow you to let the stormwater go where it's always gone. I believe if we would have challenged that, if they said no, we probably would have won. This client didn't have the time to wait, so we had to come up with another solution. And that other solution caused the site to be elevated about 1.5 feet more than what it would have been if we went to the canal too. So it cost them money, but waiting and fighting it in a legal battle would have cost a lot more. And they.
So the way you did it, weren't you discharging it from one swell to another, which is basically unlawful?
So let's back up
If you
here.
go back to
No way would I do that, Mr. McLean.
never mind.
No, good question. No, so let's flip back to the previous slide, Kelly.
Wait a second, I represent Udell. I'm not sure you should answer that question there, Brian.
I'm going to just tell him what I did and let him decide. So to the north of our property, those two dotted lines represent the two swales that were coming through our property and continuing to the north. We calculated how much of our property went into each swale, and we sized our orifices according to that historic release rate. So this property of Cascade Ridge Apartments, before the development, always went north and drained across the downstream property. After development, it went north and went across the downstream property as well, in the same swales that took the water before we developed.
Let's see.
That's an impressive collection system.
Well, it was a last resort, but thank you. It really should have been piped to the canal from day one, in my opinion. I think if they'd have pushed harder, I think they'd have probably gotten an approval. So the next example, I really already touched on a little bit earlier because Kelly had asked for an example and I talked about McKinneyland Apartments, but what I did is I added some red arrows. So if you can imagine, the buildings are removed. So this site plan shows the apartment buildings that are going to be built. There was a low swale that went through this property, and it took the water from the east side of the neighborhood in May and Fuller Lane, and it routed it through this property. So knowing that that had to be preserved, what we did in our design is we installed a drainage inlet right in the lowest spot of that swale. And we are going to build, it hasn't been built yet, but in the design, there's a 12-inch pipe that skirts the east property line and then the north property line around the northernmost building and ties into our storm drain system downstream of our flow control. So we're not metering or restricting the upstream property's stormwaters. We're passing it. And it ends up in the same basin. It just hits that basin about 150 feet to the east of where it historically did. It used to go across the property, hit the swale that's along the railroad, and then go north and hit an inlet that took it into the city system of Russell. We're taking it into the system about 150 feet to the east. My opinion is that is very legit. We're in the same basin. We're just introducing it at a slightly different point of a public system in a public right of way. So there's a legal right to do that.
I remember the phase one of McKinney Lane, it was pretty contentious because the neighbors were really concerned about the drainage, because they already had drainage issues there.
Yep.
Part of it was where it went underneath Russell Drive, I think it kind of, things just backed up there.
Yep.
And I remember at the time, I was very confident that what you guys were gonna do with that would actually significantly improve that area. What's the real world experience? Has it really helped out quite a bit?
Well, not be a smart aleck, but nobody's called us telling us there's a problem. I believe it did. And that's a great point. So many times I'll go to a public hearing and there'll be testimony from the neighbors and they'll say, we have tons of drainage problems. They're just going to exacerbate them. They're going to add to it when they develop. Well, the reality really is, in my opinion, because we are very conscious, and I say we, I don't speak for all engineers because some of them don't always do it right, but the first thing we do on a project is figure out where our water's going today and what's coming onto our property, because we know we're going to have to deal with both of those aspects. So I think when you develop land, you fix more problems than you cause when it comes to drainage, just because you put in a developed system.
Especially when
Yeah.
the Willamette Valley is historically a swamp. And it's already had quite a few canals and ditches to help part of that, but when you develop a site and it's done right, like you said, it just seems like it can only improve. When there's thoughtful, modern, I guess, solutions to drainage. It seems like these sites, the whole area benefits from it.
I would agree.
Well, and to tag on to what Brian's saying, before it even comes to you guys at the planning commission, any subdivision, that's one of the first things we look for. We're we're looking at their calculations, we're looking at how the site drains, we're looking at their downstream system. So yeah, in most, 99% of the cases, it is making it better.
In that case you talk about, Jeremy, there was in the old, that's still your current drainage master plan, I believe, because you're in the process of updating it, but you haven't.
New one will be done in May.
Sweet. But they identified in that plan a natural detention facility at the north end of that property. And we went through and analyzed it. Oftentimes when they put these stormwater management plans together or master plans, they don't grab site-specific data in a lot of areas. It's kind of a broad brush. So we put together some specific data and demonstrated to them that they really didn't need that detention facility. They just needed to improve the system so it would drain better. And yeah, I agree. I think it's been much better out there. Yeah. Okay, so next slide, please, Kelly. So this is the one I mentioned at the beginning of the session that we're still working on. So I'm going to do my best to paint this picture. So this map that we're looking at is outdated now by about 5 years. So what this is this is an excerpt from another engineer's stormwater report where he identified basin number 10, which was the basin he was working on for his client. And he identified basin number 20, which was the upstream property that now my client owns, and we're trying to figure out how to drain it. So if you'll notice, there's an open channel that comes from the property identified as basin 20, and it meanders through 10, through an existing pond, and find its way downstream and eventually ties into a storm drain system. So as I understand the history with these two properties, the owner of 10 was also negotiating to buy 20 at the time they were working to develop it. So hold that thought. There is established a historic drainage way that drained property 20 through property 10. Then you flip the page, the next slide, please, Kelly. Same basins are identified, and this is what you'll see today. If you look at a current aerial photo, you'll see that basin 10's been developed as a subdivision. In their stormwater report, they stubbed a 12-inch pipe to basin 20's property, and in the report, they demonstrated that they've provided adequate capacity to drain property number 20. What they didn't do is they didn't provide an easement across lots 35 and 36 to give my client a legal right to get to the storm drain system, and they stopped at 5 feet short. So, and the developer, because, well, this is my opinion, I think he's got a little bit of history here with lot 20, and he didn't end up owning it, so he doesn't want to cooperate. So what the cities, so we went ahead, we prepared our tentative plat for our development, our site plan review. We showed we were going to discharge just shy of the property line in a ditch, and it would find its way to the basin on the neighbor's property. And we explained how we were following the natural or historic drainage pattern. And we also provided a copy of the old report showing that the pipe was installed of adequate size. And the city came back and told us our application was incomplete because we didn't have a legal easement to use that storm system. So we're kind of stuck in a pickle. They're telling us to go east. There is an easement that the neighbor to the east will give my client, and they want us to do a drainage study and prove that the drainage system in what's called Ivy Street has capacity to take our water. So the reason I thought this was an interesting one to discuss is I think the city's steering us in a direction to violate an aspect of Oregon drainage law, because they're telling us to go into a different pipe system that discharges into a different basin. And they won't allow us to exercise Oregon drainage law and discharge into the pipe that was put in to drain this property. So it's an interesting predicament, but my client's got his attorney working on it, and we're on hold, let's put it that way.
What do you think
So-
will happen?
But what do I think will happen? I don't know. I really don't. What I hope will happen is I hope that either the current developer, because he's in the process of building homes, he hasn't sold the lots yet. I hope he'll come to his senses and realize that what he's doing is a violation before it gets to a court system. Because if it gets to a court system, I think we're going to be tied up for who knows how long. I don't know how long they're backed up right now.
So do you think that they're gonna side with the property owner on 20?
I would expect them to. I mean, just because to me, it's a very black and white situation, and Oregon drainage law was written just for this purpose.
Now,
I mean,
as a planning commission, how would we handle that?
How would you handle it? That's where I started this meeting saying, I'm not here to give you legal advice. Mr. Kennedy might want to chime in and tell you how he thinks you should handle that.
I think I can chime in a little bit here too, where we would say, as we look through subdivision maps, we identify easements and identify that there's appropriate easements for storm drainage and there's appropriate easements for sewer and public utilities identified on the subdivision map. And so as long as those easements are clearly identified when they're presented to the planning commission, your role would be to evaluate the easements that are proposed and then ask questions such as, is storm drainage addressed in this situation? And then the applicant can identify, yes, there's an easement that's identified here that would address the storm drainage law. And that would be your guys' role.
But in this
Yeah.
case, Kelly, there's not a proper easement. It's really an odd situation. There's an easement. They created an easement. It's a private easement, and it's in the document benefiting lot 35 and 36, where, in my opinion, that's kind of where the city went awry when they accepted this plat to be recorded adjacent. They should have insisted that that easement be made for the neighboring property upstream,
Right.
because that's the intention of the pipe. The pipe was in their stormwater report. They did the calculations. They showed it would provide drainage for lot 20. It's just they didn't get the right easement recorded. And now the landowner's not willing to give the right easement. And the city's saying, well, sorry about your luck, but we won't accept your application until you
So,
solve the
like,
drainage.
If this was in Kelly's backyard, she would stop this before it even came to us.
That's what the city of Jervis did. Yeah, they
Yeah.
told us our application was incomplete because which, on the private side of things, I've kind of got some mixed feelings about that too. It puts the cards in the hands of the neighbor when the city did that. They told us our application was incomplete because we had to get an easement. And I'm saying, I'm not sure that they need an easement because they have an Oregon drainage law right to discharge where it historically is discharged. We're not changing the location. There's a pipe there where there was a ditch. So I think us discharging it to that location without an easement's proper. That's just my opinion.
Brian, does that, when you're talking about historical, I mean, I'm assuming now that we're in a city and there really isn't any historical drainage, or at least we don't know much about it because everything's been built and moved the drainage around. Is that part of the problem?
Well-
What is the
map-
historical drainage in that?
Yep. The previous map shows there was a ditch there before they developed their subdivision.
Okay.
Yeah, so there definitely was a historic surface water course. So it's probably the most unique situation. I've never gotten to a project where I couldn't figure out how to drain it. We've always maybe had to bounce around and try different ideas, but in this particular case, without that easement being written for this owner and the city taking the position that they took, we're stopped. They're forcing, and maybe that's the right thing for them to do. I don't know. I'm just saying it put my client in a tough spot because when the city took that position and the guy knew that they took that position, now he holds all the cards.
Yeah.
So before you hit the Cascade Ridge, that's why I was gonna ask you what the most challenging or complex in this area, like the
Mhm.
Lebanon area? Was that?
I think that area was the most challenging. Thankfully, when Samaritan developed on the west side of the road, you know, they had the foresight and could be viewed as a violation of the Oregon drainage law, but they stubbed a storm pipe across their parking lot into Mark Slough to provide drainage for their campus on the west side of the highway because they didn't want to deal with the issues with having to go to the canal.
Thanks, we appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen and not beating me up too bad.
Thank you, Brian. Do you get paid for this?
She offered, I said no.
Well, Brian, I know it was your first time doing a presentation like this, and you did great, and it's greatly appreciated. And you're kind of an expert in this, especially in our city specifically. And so it's been wonderful to have you here. And I'll buy you a beer or something like that as payment.
Super. This is being recorded, so I'll hold you to that. Thanks, Kelly.
So we do have, looks like 12 minutes before the next meeting starts. As this is my first experience in one of these meetings with you all in the room and me not there, I just want to remind everybody to make sure that your microphones are turned on. And if you are going to speak into the microphone so that it's caught up on audio, so that we all can hear you, that we're sitting here from home, mainly me and maybe Trey.
You can hear me okay right now, Kelly?
It's a little quiet, but I can hear you better.
That's because my microphone's off. But
There
I have
you go.
the tester, I have the sign-in sheets here. Is this meeting open for people to come in tonight?
Yes, for the 6 o'clock meeting, yes.
Right, okay. And do you know, is there anyone that's warned you in advance that they will be speaking over the internet?
We received a letter, which I emailed to all of the planning commissioners yesterday, where they indicated that there might be some members of the neighborhood coming tonight, but the author of the letter would not be in attendance. And so are you holding the sign-in sheets for today?
Yes.
We'll want to put those by the door, in case somebody wants to come and sign in.
All right, welcome to the Planning Commission meeting for February 16th, 2022. We're going to open the meeting and call it to order with a flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Yes, sir. Commissioner Brashears? Here. Commissioner Garrett Kunerowski? Here. Commissioner Munn?
Here.
Commissioner Prenovo?
Here.
Commissioner McLean?
Here.
Vice Chair Robertson is excused and Chairman Salvage.
Here. All right. Has everyone had a chance to review the Planning Commission minutes from January 19th, 2022? And are there any corrections or additions on those? All right, I'm seeing none. January 19th, 2022 minutes stand as submitted. All right, citizen comments. If there's anyone here in the audience tonight or online that would like to speak about an item that is not on tonight's agenda, so that'd be an item that has nothing to do with the public hearings that are already scheduled, now would be the time to bring those before the Planning Commission. All right, I'm seeing none. Then we'll go to the public hearing portion. The first public hearing is planning file A-22-01. Before we start that, I'm going to let our city attorney go over the format and the rules for this type of meeting.
All right. Tonight's hearing will be pursuant to the quasi-judicial hearing procedures set out in Oregon law under ORS 197.763. At the commencement of the hearing, all commission members will be asked to announce any ex parte contact or conflicts of interest. Ex parte contact is contact with anyone outside of the committee meetings or with the property itself regarding the questions or issues before the council. A conflict of interest is when a commissioner or member of the commissioner's family stands to profit from the outcome or decision in some way. If you have any questions about ex parte contact or conflicts of interest, please bring them up to me and I'd be happy to address them. We will start out with the staff report, which will include information that the staff believes to be relevant to the identified criteria in the city's comprehensive plan, land use regulations, and which staff believes relevant to the issues of the hearing. After the staff report, we will allow questions of staff by the commission. We will then open the meeting up for public testimony. Testimony of witnesses will go in the following order. We will start with the applicant and any proponents of the application, as it is their burden of proof. We will then have any opponents of the application, and then finally, we will have a chance for rebuttal if necessary. We will then close the public hearing. Public testimony may be in either oral or written form, but must be concerning the issues relevant to the hearing. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria described in the staff report or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations. For those providing public testimony, please state your name and address when you testify. Please note that failure to raise an issue, including a constitutional issue or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval, if any, accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issues, will preclude any appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised no later than the close of record of the evidentiary hearing. Following the close of the public hearing, all remaining discussion will be held amongst the commission members. The commission may approve or deny the application or approve an application with conditions for approval that are supported by the facts of the case and the land use plan or regulations. And if there are no questions, Mr. Chair, you may ask if there are any conflicts of interest or ex parte contact.
Thank you. All right, for this planning file, which is A-22-01, it's an annexation on Stoltz Hill Road in Vaughan Lane. Has there been any ex parte contact or conflict of interest amongst the planning commissioners?
I may have some conflict of interest because several of the folks listed on the letter that were sent in opposition that live there was
I can't hear what's being said.
Is your mic on? You might just have to point it more in here.
I said I may have some conflict of interest because several of the people listed on the opposition letter I co-parent with, and also one of them is an employer of my husband.
I'm gonna have to
So
let the
let
city
me-
attorneys decide that.
Yeah, let me ask you one, the co-parenting thing. I mean, we live in a small community. You're going to know people with just about any development where there's going to be discussions. Do you believe in any way that that will affect your decision in the matter?
No, I don't.
Will it affect in any way that you would be biased somehow or somehow favor that position?
I don't believe so. I don't believe it
Okay.
will bias me.
So on the one, the issue of what did you say, your husband's boss?
Yes.
That would be more of would go more to a question of the conflict of interest. Do you believe that your decision in this matter could or would affect in any way the compensation that you or your family may may be entitled to as it relates to your decision in this case?
No.
And you believe you could be fair and impartial?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, and with the statement that you have provided that you know those people and you believe you can be fair and impartial, and you don't stand to gain financially in any way, I do believe you can continue in your position.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trey. Okay. Other than that, there's none, I take it? Okay. Then we'll open the hearing. This is public hearing A-22-01, and I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Hart for the staff report.
Thank you, sir. Just give me 2 seconds to get this situated. Can everybody see the screen okay? Perfect. So before the Planning Commission tonight is a proposed annexation of a approximately 80-acre parcel that's generally located in the vicinity of Stoltz Hill Road and Vaughn Lane. The parcel is currently within the county and is being proposed to be annexed into city limits. And the current comprehensive plan designation for the property is residential mixed density. And the corresponding zoning that is automatically applied to the property in compliance with the comprehensive plan is residential mixed density. And as part of this annexation proposal, the applicant has not indicated a desire to request any change to the automatic zoning of the property. And so if it were to be annexed, it would be annexed at the residential mixed density standing. Surrounding the property to the northwest is property that is within the county with a city designation of residential mixed density. And it has been developed as a large lot, single family subdivision with 1 acre minimum lot size. And then surrounding the property to the north, west, south, and east are properties that are zoned in the city or in the comprehensive plan as residential mixed density. And it includes a mix of residential uses and agriculture uses. And the property is generally within a fairly underdeveloped area. But somewhat to the northeast is a fairly developed subdivision property off of Vaughn Lane, and that's where the urbanization of the city begins as well. In terms of public facilities, there is the city's West Side Interceptor project, which would be constructed in the general vicinity of the property and along Vaughn Lane where the property intersects Vaughn. And a water line is also proposed to be extended associated with another property on Stoltz Hill that would put water within the vicinity of the property for potential future use as well. And the sewer line is anticipated if construction continues within the next 2 years, and the water line with it would be within that vicinity time period as well. And at this point in time, the city has not had any conversations with the property owner in terms of intended development. So the review of this application is strictly related to the annexation of the parcel. There is no concurrent development proposal, and our annexation ordinance and zoning ordinance do not require a development proposal as part of an annexation application. So those are the basis for the annexation. We have provided a detailed staff report and suggested findings for the Planning Commission to identify that the parcel is subject and eligible for annexation. During the public notification period, the city did receive a notice of a letter of opposition, which was included in the agenda packet as we received it prior to posting of the agenda. And yesterday evening, we did receive a public comment letter with several individuals that had signed the letter in opposition of the annexation as well. The points of concern included comprehensive plan changes and possible rezoning in terms of the applicant could in the future request for a rezoning of the property for a different type of zoning. That is absolutely within the right of the property owner to request it. If a rezoning is requested, then it does have to go forward with a similar hearing process as we are in tonight, where they have to justify the request. It has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it has to be heard before the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council. And so if that change is proposed, they would have to go through a whole separate public process for that. But ultimately, at this point in time, there is no zone change or comprehensive plan change proposed. There were comments about environmental impacts and impacts to wetlands. The annexation application itself does not result in any development on the property. And so there are no environmental impacts to consider as part of the annexation itself. If a development proposal were to come before the city, the developer would have to provide us with evidence of wetland delineation to prove what wetlands there are on site and what their intended process would be for those wetlands, whether to maintain them on site or to mitigate them. We would have to do a full analysis of the site in terms of traffic congestion as well to identify if there's any additional traffic mitigation measures that would be required as part of any future development. But again, all of these concerns that are identified so far are related to a development, which are not under consideration tonight. Same with the infringement on the existing neighborhood lifestyle. An annexation does not directly relate to a development, and so therefore the action of the annexation does not change the existing neighborhood lifestyle. It is fully understood that generally speaking, when an annexation occurs, there is likely to have a development occur after that. But again, there is no development proposal in front of the city at this point in time. And any development proposal would have to go through the transparent public hearing process and ensure that any development proposal is consistent with the general plan, the comprehensive plan and the development code as well. And then there's the final request as part of the letter that would request for the zoning to be limited to low density residential with a 1 acre minimum lot size. That 1 acre minimum lot size is related to a county standard for a development, not a city standard for development. When you are within city limits and within the urban growth boundary of the city, it is intended for urbanization. And so the city does not have a land use standard or a zone standard that would restrict it to 1 acre minimum lots. So unfortunately, we would not be able to restrict it to that as part of any future development. But again, just to further reiterate, this is simply a request to annex the property. There is no proposal in front of the city, nor have we even begun reviewing any proposal to disclose at this point in time. We haven't seen any drawings or had any discussions with the property owner. And so at this point in time, the proposal is simply to annex the property and to set the zoning to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is residential mixed density. And so with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I am available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kelly. On the public notice map, the property outline, it shows that it goes right up to the boundary of Eastland Christian Academy's property. On the map that you had up on the screen when you started it, it appeared to stop well short of that. Which is correct?
Both shockingly at the same time.
Okay.
The actual property is 100 acres or so. Through Lynn County, the property owner is in the process of subdividing off the bottom portion of that property to maintain in the county. And so the total annexation area is only around that 80 acres. But as the property adjustment hasn't yet been finalized in the county, the property record still shows it as that full site. But ultimately the only area to be annexed is that shorter area that was shown on that map.
Okay, so if I'm understanding right, the strip of land that you said is it approximately 80 acres that runs from Stoltz Hill and the property line will run due east? That is not actually going to be annexed, that runs along the Eastland Christian Academy property?
Yeah, the strip of land that borders that southern property line that's shown on the public notice is about 20 acres that is not to be annexed into the city. And they're in the process of through the county doing a property line adjustment or a land partition to partition off that southern 20 acres next to Eastland Christian. And so that's not
Okay.
included in the annexation.
Okay, thank you. You guys have any other questions? I had another one, but I think I'm going to wait on it. So with that, I will invite the applicant or the applicant's representative to come forward and speak.
Good evening, Brian Bandetta, Udell Engineering and Land Surveying, 63 East Ash Street in Lebanon, and we are representing the applicant in their annexation. Everything that I planned on saying, Kelly covered in her staff report. So Kelly, I appreciate the thorough staff report. Thank you. I would like to make one point of clarification. The partition that was being processed with Lynn County was filed January 11th. So there are now 3 legal parcels, and the southern 2 that were created are not part of the annexation. Approximately 600 feet in width along Stoltz Hill, and as we work our way east, I think it's 800 feet plus along the east property line. So there's a very large strip of land adjacent to the southern adjacent properties that's not being annexed.
Okay. Kelly, are you able to flash that up on the screen for us, that map, so we can all see what Brian's talking about? Go ahead and continue, Brian.
So with that, I feel that our application as submitted demonstrates that it complies with all of the applicable City of Lebanon codes for annexation. And I'd be available to answer any questions you may have if you feel our application left some unanswered.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? So just to clarify one more time, that strip of non-blue land we're seeing, that's approximately a 600-foot buffer.
I've got a
in
copy
width.
of the recorded plat with me. If you'd like, I could introduce it into the record and you could circulate it amongst the planning commissioners.
Sure.
Okay. It's on 8.5 by 11, but I think you can read it. It's 2 pages. So I'll introduce this into the record. So this is Lynn County Partition Plat number 2022-04, I believe. And it was filed on January 11th of this year.
Once all the planning commissioners have completed review, if we could put it available for any members of the public to review as well.
Could you repeat that, Kelly?
If there's any members of the public in the audience, they should be able to review that record as well. So once the planning commissioners are done, it'd be good to put that up by the sign-in table.
Okay, I will.
So basically, this was one original parcel that the property owner has now reserved a couple segments out there, partitioning it off to keep a couple of them separate.
It will not be in that, they will not be
It's
annexed.
not in
correct.
scope, got it.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, there's 2 parcels on the south and they're both 13.11 acres.
While you guys are looking at that, are there any more questions for Brian? Looks like we don't have any more questions for you. We don't have any more questions, Brian. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone with us in person or online that would like to speak in favor of this application tonight?
There are 4 members of the public that have joined into the meeting. I don't know if they're in favor or against the application. So is there any members of the public in the room?
We do. I'm just gonna open it up to anyone who would like to speak in favor or in opposition of the public hearing. And I'm gonna give the people in the room first shot. Nope. Okay, then anyone online who would like to speak, you can let them on through.
I'm going to allow them all to talk. And then I will call out their names just so that we can keep in order. So I have Mr. Blake Gessick. Do you wish to speak on the matter?
No, not this evening.
Okay. Mr. Bob Sanders.
No, I'm on the second agenda item.
Okay. Mr. Lloyd Van Antwerp. Is not unmuting themselves. And Rob Hornaday, I believe.
Yes, that's correct, but I'm not going to speak on this. Thank you.
Okay. And that concludes all of the members in the Zoom chat.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. That's all the public comments we have. We're going to limit all further discussion between the planning commissioners and staff, so we'll close the public testimony portion. Do you guys have any questions for staff or discussion? Do you guys feel like this meets the Lebanon criteria for an annexation?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, I also agree that this meets all the criteria that we have for an annexation, and I don't see anything that would prevent that. So with that, I would entertain a motion if someone's ready to make one.
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
I move that the planning commission recommend approval of the annexation of A-22-01 to the city council based upon the written findings in the staff report.
Do I have a
Oh,
second?
did I read the wrong line?
Oh, go ahead, Dave. Finish your motion.
And direct staff to draft an order of recommendation incorporating the findings and condition of approval.
I will second that.
Okay, that was Todd that seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Okay, that motion carries unanimously. Next. Second public hearing is planning file S-22-01. This is proposal for a 26-lot subdivision. This is on the corner of Russell Drive and Franklin Street. Before we get into that, I'll just going to go back to the city attorney for a brief overview of the format and rules.
So we are going to follow the same procedures as the previous hearing relating to the order of the presentation. I will note specifically for each public hearing that the audience may provide oral or written testimony relevant to the hearing. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards the criteria described in the staff report or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or land use regulations. Failure to raise an issue, including constitutional issues or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval, if any, accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the commission and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issues, will preclude an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals. And once again, you may ask if there's any conflicts of interest.
Thank you. All right, has there been any ex parte contact or conflict of interest? No. Good. Then we'll open the public hearing and turn it over to Kelly for the staff report.
Thank you again. Let's all to get ready here. So before you tonight is a proposed subdivision of an existing approximately 4-acre parcel on the northeast corner of Russell Drive and Franklin Street. The property is zoned residential mixed density, and surrounding the property to the north, east, south, and west are all properties that are either zoned or designated in the comprehensive plan as residential mixed density. And there's a mix of apartment units and single-family residential uses in the direct vicinity of the property. In terms of availability of public facilities, there is sewer and water available in Russell Drive and partially in Franklin Street. And as part of the subdivision proposal, those utilities are to be pulled to and through the length of the property for future use in further development to the north. In terms of the subdivision itself, it is proposed to be a 26-lot subdivision with one lot that is designated specifically for storm drainage purposes at the corner of Russell and Franklin. The lots are an average utilizing the lot averaging process that the city has available for subdivisions, which requires for if you're going to use the lot averaging for a certain portion of it, they can be allowed to be less than 5,000 square feet. So long as that is counterbalanced with at least as many properties that are larger than 6,000 square feet. And so we do have a range of properties that are between 4,133 square feet to just over 6,000 square feet as well. The properties would be accessed from a new local public street that would have access off of Franklin Street. However, there are a total of 4 lots that would have frontage on Franklin, and there's a total of 3 lots that would have frontage on Russell Drive. For the lots that have frontage on Russell Drive, there is an existing condition on the site that has a total of 3 driveway access points. And so, or I'm sorry, 2 driveway access points. And so to allow for access off of Russell, that condition is proposed to be maintained, which means that 2 of the lots would have to have a shared driveway access, and the 3rd residential lot, and now I'm getting myself confused because I'm partially blocked here. There would have to be, let me start all over now that I'm not blocked. There's 4 lots that have access off of Russell. There is a need for at least 2 of those lots to have a shared driveway to maintain that existing condition standard and to allow access off of Russell. Franklin Street is a collector street, so we do allow for access off of Franklin, which allows for those 4 parcels off of Franklin, and then the remainder of those parcels would have access off of the new public road. There are easements proposed throughout the property for, again, the driveway access to ensure that there's shared driveway for the required parcels, as well as public utility easements, storm drainage easements, and I believe private sewer easements as well. The properties are of sufficient net size and width to allow for single family or duplex development per our code. And so with all of those standards being met, the subdivision proposal meets all the development code requirements. And then I do want to identify that Franklin Street as part of this proposal would also be improved to provide the full sidewalk, full street width, and full public improvement on Franklin Street as well. And so I think I have covered everything that we need to. I can conclude my report and answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Kelly. Could you go over that section of the shared driveways off of Russell Drive? I was a little confused on that.
I confused myself, so it's totally understandable.
okay.
I just get confused. So as an existing condition on the property as it sits today, there's a total of 3 driveways on the property, I believe. To allow for Russell Drive to have access from a private property, we're allowing that as an existing condition. They're proposing 4 lots on the property. And so those, at least 2 of those lots need to have a combined shared driveway the way that they would be designed. And so those 2 lots would need to have a shared access easement between the 2 of them to be able to have access to the property and maintain the existing condition. We would not allow for each property to have their own driveway because that is exceeding the existing condition and it would not be compliant with our code, as there's restricted access associated with subdivisions off of Russell Drive and any minor arterial in the city.
Okay, that makes sense. And did I understand when you said full improvements on Franklin Street, you meant the entire length of the development, not just where it goes to 3 lanes out towards Russell Drive, correct?
It would be all the way through to the northern property line would be required to
Okay.
be improved.
And was there a previous approval for a apartment complex on this same piece of land?
No,
Am
this
I mi-
land recently annexed into the property. There is an apartment complex that was previously approved and developed on the property right across the street from this one on Franklin. But this is the only development proposal that has been presented to the Planning Commission for this specific property.
Okay. Yeah, for some reason, I thought that we had annexed it and also approved something for it, but I must have been confusing that with something else.
I think it's part of the public comments associated with the annexation. There was concern that it would be apartments as part of the public comment period.
That may have been it. You guys have any questions for Kelly? Or any staff member?
I did. Maybe it's because I'm uneducated or whatnot, but in regards to traffic, individually, I think there's been several developments in this area. I know that that's a concern for people that live nearby and people who are frequenting airport in the area. But so independently, this doesn't require a study to be done, but at what point do you compile these, or could you explain, like if there's 4 new developments or 3 or whatever going in, do you consider those each individually, or do they compile? Do you see what I'm saying? Like add to each other? At what point does that become a concern? Because I feel like there is a lot of development in that area, and so I feel like that might be.
So I can start and then I'm sure Ron can add some to this as well. But the project itself does not trigger the need for a traffic impact analysis. The city does have discretion that we can look at a cumulative impact and say, you know, based off of our understanding, this project could trigger some improvements that we would see because of the increased traffic in the area, and it might be a triggering point. That being said, so we do have that discretion. In this case, the property to the south, so the Mckinneyland Apartments 2, and the apartment complex just across the street from this one, both did traffic impact analysis within the last year and a half of this specific intersection and the surrounding areas. And so it's one of those situations of this surrounding area has already been evaluated twice. And so there was an understanding associated with the annexation that there could ultimately be development for this property as well. And so the mitigation that has already been done as part of previous traffic impact analysis, including the inclusion of the 3rd lane for a designated turn lane on Franklin, already mitigates the anticipated increased traffic in the area. And so there's no additional mitigation that could be done except for maybe a 4-way stop, but that would be something that Ron would need to discuss And I don't think is warranted as part of any of the other traffic impact analysis that has been done.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
I think
Do
so.
you have more?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I just,
I have a question. The road here, it looks like it, dog legs to the west, is that a dead end proposed in this, or is there gonna be further extension of that road in the future?
I believe the way it's drawn up is that it just is gonna stop there unless there is future development that would probably tie into that, possibly tie into that. That would be up to the future developer.
That's
The
correct, yes.
property to the north is similar in terms of width, that road would be able to extend to the north and connect further. And so although there's no plans for that and it's not necessarily a requirement, it would provide for that internal access rather than access on Franklin Street for any future development to the north.
Second question is property sizes. Is the net square feet accounting for any setbacks on each of the lots? Is that the way I would understand that?
The net square feet removes any access easement requirements. And so that's how the code requires it. You look at gross square footage in terms of setbacks and you look at property lines in terms of setbacks, but the net square feet is just in terms of removing any specific access requirements because you can't build on it and you can't live on it.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. The road, I guess I didn't hear, was it a private road or is this going to be incorporated into the city's maintenance
It's a
into
public.
the city?
Yeah, it'll be a public street.
Okay, thank you.
I had the same question. I know she answered that earlier, but I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Secondary question then, is the road wide enough? Will there be off lot or on-street parking available for these homes?
It'll be, I guess, city standard so that it allows for, I didn't hear the road width, but they have to allow for parking at least on one side, I believe.
36 feet, 36-foot
Yeah.
road.
I can't remember off the top of my head what the roadway width was.
It says 30. It looks, oh, shoot. It looks like it
36
says 36 foot here,
36
Ron.
curb to curb.
56 from outside to the sidewalks.
So that's our standard out of our TSP, which I assumed that it would be. So that would, on a 36, you would be able to have parking on both sides, it looks like.
Kelly, final question from me. Well, maybe not. The existing access or driveways off of Russell Drive, I'm not real wild about people's driveway going onto that road, but because they're already there, it's a given. Is that correct?
We looked at it as it was an existing condition of the property. And so to allow for the subdivision to move forward with the layout that it is, we couldn't let them expand upon the access. And so it has 3 existing drive cuts. And so that we allowed for the 3 existing access points to be maintained, but no more than that.
Thank you. Any more questions for staff? All right, I'll invite the applicant or their representative to come forward and speak.
All right, good evening again. Brian Vendetta, Udell Engineering, 63 East Ash Street in Lebanon, Oregon. So again, I'll commend Kelly on her very detailed staff report. I think she hit the high notes. I'm going to kind of just walk you through real quick. Again, I'm going to apologize if I duplicate what she said, but we are proposing on a roughly 4-acre parcel, a 26-lot single-family subdivision, which now with the new House bill does also allow for duplexes on all lots. The streets would be built to city standard and then dedicated to the city for maintenance, which is typical of a residential subdivision. They are of width that would allow parking on both sides. We looked at the property to the north. They're large lots. They're within the city limits. They're zoned RM. They do have development potential. So we've stubbed the street, splitting the common property line between those two large parcels. So if the owners ever decided they wanted to further divide or urbanize the properties to the current maximum potential, that they could extend the street to do so. In doing that, we've planned for and visited with the local fire marshal. We'll provide an emergency service vehicle turnaround that complies with the fire code, short of that dead end. City utilities, they are all available either in Russell Drive with respect to sewer, water, and storm drain, or in Franklin Street. They stop short of our north property line, so the proposal would be to extend them per city standards to the north property line, build out the balance of Franklin Street adjacent to where the apartments across the street built their half-street improvement, and then develop a half-street to city standard with curb gutter and sidewalk on the east side along the frontage of our subdivision to our north property line. The storm drain system that was built with Russell Drive was built large enough to accommodate the stormwater that would be developed off the property. We've incorporated in our preliminary design a tract A that's going to facilitate a construction of a detention pond that will allow us to provide flow control and meter the discharge so that it's limited to that of today's historic rates. With that, I'd probably stop and state that we feel that the application meets all of the relevant Lebanon Development Code criteria. We have read through the proposed conditions and we would accept them as written and ask that the Planning Commission approve the subdivision as proposed. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Just a question out of curiosity, of the 26, how many are going to be duplexes?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that my client knows the answer to that right now yet either. I think the market's going to dictate that.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
All right, is there anyone in the audience or online who would like to speak in favor or in opposition of this application?
We do have
You
three.
have, yeah, I'll let you do your thing, Kelly. No one here in person is going to come forward.
Okay. We will start with Bob Sanders.
Yes, I have more of a question on the Franklin improvements. So it looks like you've spoken to
Can you provide your name and address first before?
Oh.
Sorry.
Bob Sanders, Creations Northwest, representing the developer, 14020 Southeast Johnson Road, Suite 102, Milwaukee, Oregon, 97267. Just to clarify on the improvements that may be required for Franklin, mentioned about 3-lane and an improvement. Are we improving to the west curb line and all the pavement, or just a half street improvement, or 3/4 street improvement, and then widen to what looks like you have a left turn lane down by Russell?
Ron, do you want to help me out with that answer?
Yeah, so your requirement is going to be the entire frontage of Franklin Street, half street improvement or thereabouts, the half street improvement. What was built during the apartment was probably more of a 3/4 street. It won't be built. It wasn't built all the way full length of your property. It was just to the property that the developer of the apartment complex built. So you guys would be required to take your half-street improvement all the way to the end of your property, along
Okay.
with all the utility extensions.
Thank you.
And then does either Blake Gessick or Robert Hornaday would like to speak?
Looks like no.
Maybe, hang on. One of them is unmuted, so I'm not sure. If Robert, did you have anything to say?
Well, I was just going to say I am in favor of this. My name is Robert Hornaday. I also work for Creations Northwest, and as Bob does. And that's really all I had to say. If you needed to hear a yes.
Okay. All right, then seeing nobody else wanting to raise their hand or unmute, I think that concludes anybody on the Zoom call.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. All right, that concludes the public testimony portion. All further discussion will be between the planning commissioners and staff. Do you guys feel like this has met the conditions of the criteria set forth in the planning code?
Yes, I do.
You guys have any issues with this planned subdivision? Okay. Is anyone wanting to make a motion?
Before we do that, sir, I do, it's at your discretion at this point since we did close the hearing, but I do have a raised hand from Mr. Sanders. I'm not sure if you want to reopen the hearing to allow him to speak, or since we've closed it, we can move forward. Just want to let you
That
know.
was-
Yeah,
I did that
I'll
previous.
reopen.
I'm good. I did it previously.
Okay,
Okay, all right.
sorry. Joys of Zoom.
With that, I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Yeah, make sure that you can
Yes,
hear you there.
it is. I move that the planning commission approve the proposed subdivision application S 22-01 for the 26 lot subdivision, adopting the written findings contained in the staff report with the conditions of development, and direct staff to draft an order of decision incorporating the findings and conditions of approval.
I'll second that motion.
All right. That was a second from Tina. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. All right, that motion is unanimous. It's a yes, a unanimous yes. All right, commission business and comments.
I do have 3 items for you all, actually. The first one is just a quick question. In our signage code as it currently sits, we only allow for 1 monument sign or pylon sign per property. We have seen some properties with a request that are on a corner lot and have frontage on 2 different roads to be able to have a sign for each road. And as our code doesn't currently do that, nobody's chosen to pursue it. But since we have had that request, I wanted to know if there was just sort of a temperature read on the planning commission, if they would like to see for a quick code cleanup to allow for that issue to be addressed. And if so, we would bring forward a proposed ordinance before the planning commission, which would just simply allow for 1 monument or pylon sign per street frontage of a commercial property. So just wanted to get some quick temperature reads on that, and then we can move forward with a code change if possible.
Well, my initial thought is that'd be a courtesy to drivers. If they're looking for something, they could, whatever street they're coming down, they'd be able to identify the
Yeah.
property.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely open to that discussion.
Okay. Any other thoughts from those in the room?
How does everybody else feel about that?
I don't have an opinion.
Sounds
Okay.
like everybody's open to it.
We,
Kelly.
we just want a sign code that makes sense and works for everyone. So if I
Okay.
think if we can have a good discussion on that and, yeah, we'll go
Okay.
forward on that.
Sounds good. The other item is, we are actively pursuing trying to become paperless within our organization. As we move forward and as technology permits. And so one of the items that we have brought up is to no longer print out and mail planning commission packets. If everybody is okay with us sending an email with a link to the planning commission packets for you to review on your computer. Or we can identify those that still want to receive it in paper and we can send those off and then the rest of them can receive it electronically. So I can send out an email to everybody to just have you identify which way you'd prefer to receive it. And any way that we can reduce having to do duplication of work with having to print out paper packets and do online versions would be appreciated. But no decision needs to be made right now. I'll just email everybody about it as well. And then finally, one of the things that we are going to attempt to do this year is a planning commission update to the city council, where a planning commissioner or two could come and speak directly to the city council to provide feedback on to the council on what, as a commission, you have worked on and seen as part of the planning commission, and have a dialogue with council about if there's anything that you'd like to see as well. And so that would be at the April city council meeting potentially. And so I would try to get the chair and another member if possible that would be interested in participating in that presentation. And I, of course, will help put together the materials to present to council. But having a member or two available at that meeting to discuss your experiences on the planning commission would be grateful.
Okay, can we, do we need to decide tonight or can we have a little discussion about this in March? Are we gonna have a March meeting, I guess?
I don't know if we will have any items on the agenda for applications, but we do have another planning commission training scheduled for March. And so we can do the March training at the very least, and discuss it at that point. But just wanted to bring it up tonight to get everybody's ear on it. And obviously it would be a lot easier with me being there in person too. So I get it.
What's the date for the April city council meeting? The 13th?
Good grief. Yes, the 13th.
I'm available.
Wonderful. Okay. And that's pretty much all I have. I've talked to you guys to death already about the housing production strategy and economic opportunity analysis. Both of them got kicked off this week. And so I have nothing further to add unless you have any questions for me.
Looks like no.
Wonderful.
Aren't you glad you don't have to drive home tonight?
I'm looking forward to being in bed in 10 minutes.
NyQuil in bed, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we missed you because it does go a little bit smoother when you're here, but we want you to get better. So get some rest and we'll see you next month. Maybe.
Thanks.
Yep. Okay, this meeting is adjourned.